So thank you all for joining us this morning. We're delighted to be joined by Karyn Williamson from DigiKive, and a familiar face to many of us from her work with ARA, particularly sterling work as chair of ARA Scotland, but also an experienced digital archivist, and indeed from just last week, the new digital preservation analyst at the DPC. So an ideal guide to the wonderful world of all things digital preservation. And I will now pass over to Karyn. Thank you all very much.
Lovely, thanks, Robert. I will do my best to live up to that introduction. So, hi everybody. So like Robert said, my name's Karyn, and I'm a digital preservation specialist with DigiKive. So I've been an archivist for around 15 years, and the last 6 of them sort of focused on digital preservation. And I started DigiKive up because I wanted to help people who were experiencing the same things that I did when they first started out on their digital preservation journeys. It can feel like a massive shift to move from working with physical records to digital ones. And although there are many very obvious differences, many aspects of the process are actually the same. And I would argue that the most important elements are the same as when we deal with physical records. So just to sort of set expectations for this session, this webinar is for complete beginners. And the aim is to give a practical way to increase your confidence and get you started on your digital preservation journey. So hopefully by the end of the hour, you'll feel confident enough to get started and begin the process towards understanding and preserving your digital records. So next hour, we'll talk about the similarities between archive and digital preservation work, and the transferable skills that we have already and using what you already have to get started. How to find out what you have and where it is. Of and maintaining a digital asset register, and the information that you will need to preserve your content going forward. And as a sort of golden thread running through the hour, I'll be comparing the steps to physical archive work as we go through, just to show you how similar the process is, and to highlight the fact that you may think you have no idea what you're doing, but you've very, very likely already started in some way. So without further ado, on to step 1. Which is the environment that you work in. So in a physical world, for us, this step is almost automatic. When we begin to process a collection, we scope out the areas that we're working in to make it as suitable as possible for working on the records that we have. And as we all know, it may not always be perfect conditions, but we adapt to make the best of our circumstances. So we use the largest tables available, we stack boxes, volumes and papers on trolleys. We check that we have 2HB pencils and staple removers, and we check that when we're moving the collection, we're going to have enough space to actually accommodate it where we want it to go. This is the same step on your digital preservation journey. The parameters are just slightly altered to accommodate the digital world. So when you think about working on a physical collection, the questions that we automatically ask ourselves start with, for example, space. Do I have enough space to work in the way that I need to? Can I get more space if I need it? And medium and format also comes into it. So what record types am I working with? Where are they currently held? How do I get them to where I want to process them? And then we think about resources. So do I have everything that I need to process this collection to my standards or the standards that I'm working within? And these questions are actually the same in a digital context. So, for example, for space, do I have enough space on the drive dedicated to the archive to transfer any records that I need to process? And if not, how do I get more space? Can I get more drive space allocated to me, or do I need to use hard drives? And when we're thinking about medium and format, we're thinking, what operating system am I working with? Where are the records that I want to preserve currently stored, and can I actually access them, or does somebody else have access to them? And how do I get them to the processing area if that step is needed? And is there a particular format in use, or am I working with a mix of formats? And then thinking about resource, do I have the software and the equipment I need to begin to process these records? And in terms of software, this can be as simple as a Microsoft package or the equivalent for Mac or whatever system that you work on. And at this point, I would also suggest write and tear a copy at the very least, but there will be more on this later, so don't panic at those words. And if you don't have the answers to any of these questions, you need to find someone within your organisation who. So whether that be an archive manager or an IT person, somebody will be responsible for the environment that you work in. And if you're a community archive or archivist, your PC top user manual, it can help you with a lot of these questions. And many of the answers will relate to the way in which you use your computers every day. For example, you use Windows and you work with Microsoft Word, Excel. And nothing needs to change for the basic processing that we'll be talking about today. If you start writing down the answers to some of these questions as you go along, you'll have the beginnings of a digital preservation process document. And you can also adapt this into a digital preservation policy if one is needed where you work, but it is by no means essential. And if you do want to take this a step further and assess your full digital preservation capacity and capability, the DPC Rapid Assessment Model, known as short as DPC RAM, is a valuable tool for allowing you to do this. And this can be a useful tool if you think that you may need to apply for funding to do this work in the future. It also gives you an idea of all the areas that you need to be thinking about as you go along, and also the areas that may need more work. And the DPC has a full guide on completing your RAM assessment, and it's designed to only take around half an hour. So if you have got the time to do that, it really is worth doing. And they're actually relaunching RAM on Friday, which has been designed with community archives in mind, so it should actually be simpler to follow now than it has been previously. So I genuinely believe that most of the people on this call will already have a lot of this information. And if they do, then congratulations, you're actually already doing digital preservation. You've already started. And once you've done that and you're happy with the information that you have, you can move on to step 2. And for step 2, it's find out what you have and where it is. So now you know that your workstation is ready, you can turn focus to the records that you're processing. And at this point, you need to ask yourself some questions about the collections that you have to make sure that you're happy with the processing decisions that you're going to make later on. So first of all, do the records that you're processing have evidentiary value? So are they likely to be required to authenticate something that took place at a particular time and place? Or will they ever be audited and the date of creation and items like that will be of importance? You need to make this decision before you start moving any records, as moving records in the standard way via Windows Explorer or equivalent will change the date modified, which can cause problems if evidential value is an important thing for your collections. But if this doesn't matter and you're preserving the records for historical value or future access, it's fine to move forward. But if it does matter to you, and only you will know the answer to that, you need to research and obtain right blocker software for moving forward. So I'm not going to focus on this here due to the fact that we only have an hour, but if resources on this topic would be useful, you can feedback via the SCA and we can definitely see what we can produce in the future to help with that. So secondly, are you dealing with records which are only on the PC or laptop that you're working on, or do you have content in other places? If your content is spread out, it's worth putting a plan in place for how you will access all the content that you want to work before you move forward. And depending on your answer to your first question, a write blocker may also be required here if you want to or need to move the records. So when you get started in this area, the first thing you will need is somewhere to log the information you're about to find. And this is the same as physical record processing, where the first thing you do is set up an accessions list or a box list, depending on what you call it, where all the field names contain all the information that you will need to accurately catalogue your collection. A digital asset register is a digital equivalent of this accessions list or box list. The main difference between the two is the terminology and the fact that additional format details are required to preserve digital records. You might choose to combine your physical and digital accessions lists so that everything is in the one place, or you could choose to keep them separate. And the volume of material that you deal with is going to be a key consideration here. But before you make that decision, I would suggest working through the creation of your digital asset register and confirm the information it needs to contain, and then decide whether it needs to merge the two lists or not. So to start creating your digital register, you need to decide what information about your digital records is most important to you and how you process and catalogue collections. And this information will make up the headings of your asset register. You will be best placed to decide this based on your current practice, but some suggestions are here. So the name of the collection or group of files that you're logging, the size of the collection, any formats included, who has ownership for or responsibility for the records, any risks that you have associated with it that you're keeping, retention periods if you require them, and also the location of the content. You may wish to include some additional fields that will help with future cataloguing, such as dates covered or description, but as already mentioned, will depend on your current process. A digital asset register should contain a list of all archive content within your place of work, whether or not the records are already in the archive. The easiest way to log this information is in a spreadsheet, which will also make it easier to work with when you're ready to start processing your collections. So as anyone who has ever typed digital preservation into Google will know, there are many options available to those preserving digital content, and we would need months and months to go through them all. So for this webinar, I focused on the most basic, almost free option, which will be enough for the majority of files that you'll be processing in your archives. But we've now reached the point in the process where we need to look at software to help us process the records and extract the information that you're going to need to preserve them. I'm going to give an overview here of 3 different programs, which I think will be of the most benefit to the preservation workflow. Now, these programs are all easily downloaded and all have a interface, so you don't need to worry about learning code or using command lines or anything tricky. These particular programs, you click buttons and ideally they work. So first up is a program called Terracopy. Terracopy is a file transfer program which will replace your use of Windows or equivalent. The reason for this is that transferring files using copy and paste in Windows Explorer has some problems. So if a file name exceeds the allowed Explorer limit, it will halt the transfer to highlight an issue, but it doesn't tell you where the problem file is or allow you to rectify it and then move on with the work that you're doing. The modified date is also changed when using Windows Explorer, and there's also no log facility, so you have no way of proving what you've moved, when, or where you've moved it to. Terracopy solves all these problems and has a basic checksum feature. If you have no budget at all and cannot purchase the third software program that we're going to come to talk about later on, we will come back to this when we get there, so don't worry about that. Once downloaded, Terracopy will integrate with your operating system on Windows or Mac, so you have the option to open the program and use it in a way, use it that way, or you can right-click on folders and then click Transfer via Terracopy. It's very intuitive to use and can be used at numerous stages in your workflow. For example, transferring records into your processing area before you start to work on them, or moving records within your area to ensure they are in the correct folders before you begin your cataloguing and preservation work, but also moving records to your final storage place. And there'll be more on that later. Aside from digital preservation, Terracopy is a useful program to use in your day-to-day work, so it is worth downloading. It's a program built and maintained by CodeSector, and their website has a good user manual to provide help as needed. So once I've talked about all 3 programs, I will do a very quick of them so you can see what they look like and the sort of basics of how they work, but I won't do full demo actually, just because of time constraints. So the next bit of software that I want to talk about is Droid. Now, in my opinion, Droid is pretty much one of the single most useful programs that you can use for processing your digital files. Droid stands for Digital Record Object Identification and is primarily a file identification tool developed by the UK National Archives. But the output it gives provides much more information that will be of use to you in your processing work. So Droid works by using the file tags at the end of files, i.e. .docx for Word, .pdf for PDF files, so on and so forth, to confirm that the record is what it says it is. Pronom, format registry, which contains a list of these tags, as well as the other unique features, including file format signatures to help identify these file formats. Droid compares your files against the information held in Pronom and identifies what the files are and lets you know if there are any identified files or problems. You can then save the Droid profile to run it in the future if you need to. And you can also export the Droid results as a CSV file, which means you can store it and use it to help with file processing and cataloging later on. Now, the information in Droid may also help your digital asset register creation. As mentioned previously, knowing what you have and where it is arguably the most important part of a digital preservation process. And Droid is the easiest way, in my opinion, for you to obtain that information. Droid is easy to download and run, and the user manual provided is really good, providing step-by-step instructions that take you through using the program. So, at this point in the process, you've now got all the records that you want to process into the right safely, and you know what you have and you know where it is. Your final step is to continually check that the records remain uncorrupted and accessible. And the easiest way that I've found to do this is a program called Fixity Pro. Fixity Pro is a program that assigns each record an individual code number called a checksum the first time you run it over your files. After that, each time you run the program, it checks the code number against the number produced on the rerun. And if those numbers match, the file has not been changed or corrupted and should still be fit to access. If the numbers do not match, the program will tell you, and an investigation is required into the reason why. You can set up Fixity so that it runs checks automatically to a time period that suits you. Every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, there is no limit. And you can also export the output of a Fixity report to a CSV file the same way that you Droid. However, it's important to note that Fixity Plus is not free, and it costs around £45 per year. And if this is unaffordable, Terracopy can do a similar job for free. And the user guide explains how to do this, although Terracopy does have limits. It gets a bit clunky if you're running loads and loads of files through it. So I'm just going to put this down here and show, outside the road. There we go. So the first one that I talked about is Terracopy, and this is Terracopy here. So the first thing to remember is that all of this software, because it's free and open source, it will be quite basic interfaces, which is actually quite a good thing. So you can see here you've got your source and your target buttons. So when you click on the source, you can find add files and add folders here that you want to move, and then you see target location here. It shows you can then copy, move, and test and verify. And it shows you here all the different ones that you're running. As a sort of addendum to this webinar, we're hoping to produce how-to videos for this software. So if that would be helpful to you, mention that in the feedback to Robert. So that's Terracopy. And then next up in the process, we had Droid. So as I say, very, very basic user interface, but Droid has probably one of the best user manuals that I've ever seen for running a program. So if you want to use Droid, and I would strongly recommend it, the user guide will take you through step by step. So this untitled profile would be here, and you would add, you go into your computer here, and it shows you a list of everything that you have, and you can add a folder, any folder, and it will run, and then that puts that into your profile, and then you start it, and that's it literally running, and that you're going to get the outputs in here. So it shows you all the different content that you have in these folders. The folder I've picked doesn't have very much, unfortunately, in it, but you can see there that if there was different files in here, it would show you the file extension, the size of the file, the last time it was modified, the format and the version. And all of this information is really useful to you when you are creating your digital asset register or working out what information you need to preserve your files. Finally, the last one that we talked about was Fixity Pro. So it looks a little different because it has a little bit more money put into it. So again, this is a test project here. So you would add the file path to the folder that you want to scan. And then this is if you want to set it up to run automatically, or you can just hit scan now. You've got the option to get the report emailed to you if that's what you want to do. And then up here, you can save your project so that when you want to rerun, if you want to run it again manually yourself, you can, or you can use the timer function to run it at periods that suit you. Okay. So this slideshow shows the basic workflow that we've talked through in this webinar. And if you work through it from end to end, you will have a basic digital preservation process up and running. And for many organizations, you genuinely won't need much more than this. You deal with the same file types around 95% of the time, and these checks are enough to keep everything ticking over and accessible. Once you get comfortable with this, you may want to learn more or add in additional steps, like basic digitization to preserve content on any physical media you may have, or look into to fix more complex errors that may arise as you go forward. But it's important to note this field is huge, and there's a lot to explore if you've got the time and the inclination to do so, but it's also not obligatory. And the basics are fine, and they will work for you as long as they're carried out. But if you do need extra help, or in some cases the basics may have gone a bit wrong and you don't know what to do next, there are many different organisations and resources out there that can help, many of which offer free advice and guidance in a range of different ways. And there's just some of them on this slide. So it's important to note that just like in the physical archive world, every archive is different, and tweaking a process until you find the right way that works for you in the situation that you're in is absolutely fine. So this webinar has tried to cover a really basic workflow in the most basic way to give you a starting point for processing your digital files. And in the time that we have left, I'll do my best to answer any questions that you might have. The slides and script will be made available after the webinar, and additional resources are in production to try and help further as well. So as Robert said at the start, the first webinar that we've done on this kind of content, so any feedback about content or the level of instruction, or indeed suggestions on what we should be covering next would be appreciated. So thanks very much for taking the time to come along today, and good luck on your digital preservation journey.
Thank you very much, Karyn. So if you have any questions, you can either put in the chat box or the Q&A box. Both should be open, so please do fill anything in. Or alternatively, if you're happy to raise your hand and I will switch on your microphones and camera.
Yeah, so happy to answer any comments or questions about the content you covered, or any additional questions or anything. It would be good to hear at the level, was this level that we pitched this webinar at, was it too basic? Is it not basic enough? Is there anything that you would need more advice on? This is really is the time to let us know what you think, because it will shape what we are doing going forward. Oh, so I've got a question there from Elizabeth. How would you suggest a small organisation initially sets up its digital preservation? So it depends on the organisation, I think. The sort of steps that we've gone through in the webinar, I think could work for a small organisation, but the sort of most important to remember when you're preserving digital content is knowing what you've got and where it is. So even if you've got a small organization, you could have content based in a range of different drives, on different hard drives, on different media. So it's really important that you know where everything is, and also make sure that you can access it. So you would be best placed to know how that would work for your institution. If you're sort of talking really small, a dedicated workstation can be really useful because you can put all the software on it that you need, and you can access everything in the one place. which makes it a lot easier to process, I think. And then you'll sort of see for yourself if it needs to grow from there. That's how I would start. And I would start with the sort of basics of working out what you've got, where it is, the information that you need to process your collections, running through this workflow, and then deciding from there if you need to expand up. So hopefully that helps. I have lots of experience of trying something and it not working and then me having to try something else. So just to give you a sort of insight into my background, was that I worked for a financial institution for 10 years. And the last 6 years was focusing on digital preservation, but they had no budget and they had very limited resources. So I've gone through the process myself and tried all different kinds of software and tried all different kinds of courses and training. And a lot of it when I first started wasn't basic. There was a sort of assumed level of knowledge. And I didn't have that level of knowledge. So that's why I've tried to sort of pare it back, hopefully without being patronising. That was never the intention. So that's why I'm so keen to make sure that everybody's happy with the level that it's at, or if there's anything else that we could be covering. Yes, Harry J, definitely. I think that's the thing. Digital preservation always seems really scary to begin with because it feels like you're doing something totally different from what you've done before. But hopefully you've sort of seen today a lot of it you'll know the answers to already. And with everything new, there's a level of learning that's going to come through. So it is really important to give yourself some time and realize that you are learning in some cases. Although the process is the same, there might be some different things.
Thank you.
Robert,
We
it says
actually
there's
have,
two
yeah,
hands
we've got a question in from our Kenyan delegation, and it is: do the 3 software programs work together, or having one will be enough to start in this journey of digital preservation?
I would say that the 3 programs all do different things, because they work at different stages of the process. So having, I would say, if you're going to pick one to start with to learn, pick Droid, because Droid gives you the most information that you need when you're processing records, and knowledge really is power in the case of digital preservation. So I would start with Droid, definitely, and then move on to Terracopy, because if you don't have any budget at all, Terracopy does have that fixity checksum process that Fixity Pro does. It's just a little bit clunkier. Maybe takes a bit more learning to use, I would say. But yeah, if you're going to pick one to start with Droid.
Thank you very much. Zoe, I'm going to switch your microphone on now, if you'd like to ask away. Hi Zoe, you should be unmuted. We'll try a second with Elizabeth. I'll do the same for you if you'd like to. And you should also.
Hi, can you?
Is that? Oops, sorry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Is that you, Elizabeth?
Yep,
Yes.
can you hear you, Elizabeth?
Yeah, apologies. Another question. You're obviously doing these different processes of sort of checking formats and moving things around. How would you recommend you draw together all this information? Obviously, they'll each sit in the rooms in which they're generated, but how do you retain that overall management of that information in such a way that, first of all, it's secured, but secondly, you can report on it and you can demonstrate it?
Yeah. So the good thing about Droid and Fixity Pro is that they both allow you to export in a CSV format. So basically, for those that don't know, a CSV format is the most basic spreadsheet format that you can get. Rookie tip that I did not know when I first started: when you export into an CSV document, you can add other content to that. So what I did was I copied and pasted the information from each CSV file into a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet format, because that's what we used. And that kept my Droid information on one worksheet and my Fixity Pro information on another worksheet. And that way I could see everything that I had in the one place. And I did that for each collection that I was working on.
Right.
And that way your information is there, it's accessible, and you can sort of play with it
Yeah.
if you're better at Excel than me.
Brilliant. So then what you were doing was you were creating a sort of audit trail of each. You worked by collection. I mean, now obviously that sounds quite sensible, but that's how you organized it.
Yes, so that's
Yeah.
how I did it. I think one of I mentioned it and I meant to in the process, was that the main difference between your physical and your digital records is in most cases scale. So you have to learn to scale the process to the volume of records that you're dealing with. So working by collection and trying to it's impossible to break it down to item level, I would say. But collection level is quite a good starting point for you, and you can get good descriptive information that you can put into your catalogs yourself from, and then back that up with the information that you're getting from Droid and Fixity.
Yeah. Thanks. Helpful advice.
Just on collecting, another question is, from a collecting standpoint, what/how/where is the best way to collect digital files from across an institution before they go through the digital asset register and cataloging process?
Okay, so if your files are spread out across an organization, the very first step that I would take is to do your digital asset register. So that will give you a list of all the records that you have and where they are. And that way you can then decide, if you have records absolutely everywhere right across your organization, you need to decide, is it going to work for me to gather all the records that have archival value into one place and process them all from the one, I don't know, archive drive, say? Or is it worth it for me at this point? Do I access all these collections individually where they are and just keep my digital asset register up to date and say, okay, everything that I've got is in all these different places, and I'm going to go around it all individually, and create the information that I need to serve it. The reason, I think, another reason that digital preservation is so hard from a training standpoint is that it's like an archive. Every single one is different. So you do have to sort of look at your own processes that are in place where you work, and then adapt the basic workflows that we've ones that we've talked through today, or indeed other ones, if you've seen other ones in other places, to find out what works for you. And when I was doing this sort of process originally, a circuit and see process was very good for me, where I could sort of try things, and if it didn't work, I would try something else. And as long as you're not accidentally deleting or changing files in ways that you're not comfortable with, there's very little that you can do to cause huge problems when you're playing about in that way. Creating a test folder full of copies of data is also a really good way to do that. Getting a folder with a few hundred file copies in it and playing about with it is a great way to find out what works best for you.
Thank you. On that, Rachel is asking, do you have any experience of moving records from SharePoint or Google Drive into an archive storage area, such as shared network drive? She's encountering a few issues, especially around preserving creation and lost modified metadata.
Yeah, so I have, I'm working on a project just now with another organization to work on their records within SharePoint. You can use, this is sort of a bit more advanced than what we're talking about today, and I don't want to confuse loads of people. You can sync your SharePoint drive to your computer. and that way you can access and move the files as if they were a part of your drive. You can use Terracopy in that case. If it's Google Drive that you're using, I've never done that. I can't comment. But if you do want to reach out and we can discuss a little bit further, I'm sort of happy to tell you the experience that I've had and see if that helps you any. That wouldn't be a problem.
Thank you very much. There's nothing else showing yet, but if anyone does have any final questions, please do make them known. If not, keep your eyes open for the follow-up survey that we'll be sending out in the next few days. And we really would appreciate as many responses as we can. Even if it's something that you think might be quite niche to your organization, the chances are it will sort of be pertinent for someone else. So a full picture would be really, really welcome. But there's no further questions currently, so we will end today's webinar now and just thank Karyn very much again, and to all of you for coming along. And if anything in particular does come up, please do just let us know. Thank you all very much.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for coming along.